Hi guys, it's John Latok here from johnlatok.com, and I've got a guy with me today that I'm just going to fire a load of questions to. His name's Andy Sloan. I've known him, I don't know how long now, probably 2 or 3 years through the course of my personal training and development and going on courses. And Andy competed last year at the Ironman World Championships in Kona. So I think obviously if you're interested in triathlon or any kind of endurance training, then we're going to get some golden nuggets off Andy today. But even if you're not so much into endurance and it's not your bag really, I think we can also pick up a lot of stuff in terms of mental toughness and getting through the training and how you stay focused. So Andy, if you can just tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you've been up to the last 2, 3 years training and competition wise.
Yes, yeah, cool. So yeah, thanks for that. I live down in Weymouth in the southwest of England. I run a personal training business down here and a fitness camp as well, which I've had those going on for about sort of 4 years or so, 5 years maybe. Training wise and triathlon wise, I actually got into triathlon. Must have been when I was about, I guess, sort of only maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I think I did my first one, which was when a mate of mine, who's the most un-triathlete-looking bastard you'd ever meet in your life, just the fact he's about 5 foot tall and absolutely stacked, he just told me he was going to do a triathlon down in Weymouth, and I was like, oh, I fancy doing that. I didn't really know anything about it, to be honest, so I went and banged that out, and it was a bit of a jumbled one, so it was like a sea swim, which is out round the rafts, which I did in a pair of shorts, absolutely freeze my bollocks off. Well, actually, after the first 20 strokes, I think I did breaststroke like right the way through, and then it was like a 5k run, which I was actually winning by the end of the run, and then it got to the bike, and I just did it on a mountain bike. I think I come sixth in the end, which is alright. But
So that was that a bit the wrong way around then, because the bike's normally last, isn't it?
yeah, so it was I think it was one for charity. It was like a jumbled one, and I think it was like just logistically because where it was going to start and finish, it just made it a bit easier, I think.
Okay.
So it wasn't. It was by no means a massive event.
All right. So what? Obviously, we got some questions I want to work through, but I'm already going off track. Based on what you said there, then, so you've gone from never doing triathlon to competing at Kona in the World Championships in, would you say, 4 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think probably it must have been about 4 years. So I think it was just after I got out of uni. I think maybe the year after that, perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah. So what were you doing before then? Were you always Were you just lifting weights? Were you running at all, or what were you doing?
Yeah, I mean, training wise, I used to play a bit of football when I was a kid. I was never like any good at anything, but that was like I'd say that was like my main sport. But then all through uni, I had my one goal through uni was just to get as big as possible.
Yeah.
Which I was pretty unsuccessful at, but I was basically just smashing the weights quite, sort of 4 or 5 times a week, really. And then I signed up to do a half marathon, so I fancied doing that, and just ended up doing that down in Launceston because my mate lived down there and did the Great North Run, and then just kind of went on from there, really.
All right, so that leads me on to one of my questions. Actually, obviously you've got a pretty well. You say you didn't really know what you were doing, but you've obviously got a strength training, a weight training background. How do you mix strength training and triathlon? Because obviously one of the things that we've seen with endurance athletes up until maybe the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I'd say, is that triathletes shouldn't touch a weight, runners shouldn't touch a weight because they're going to get big. And how do you integrate strength training with any kind of triathlon training, really?
Yeah, cool. So I mean, it's actually it's kind of simple, but it's kind of hard at the same time. It's simple in so much as the kind of principles behind it aren't really too tough to grasp, but it's often quite hard to implement it depending on like a person's circumstances. And I think a lot of people perhaps kind of don't bother doing it because of time a lot of the time, which can be a valid reason. But I think when I've looked at most people's training programs, generally there's quite a lot of junk in there, which they could quite happily sacrifice like half an hour, maybe 2-3 times a week of junk, and actually chuck in a decent bit of strength work to and get some decent benefits from it.
Yeah. So what when you say junk, what stuff are you seeing that people are kind of wasting their time on?
Yeah, just going too long, too often. A lot of the time, I mean, a lot of people, specifically if they're kind of training for anything kind of above Olympic distance, I guess. I mean, even for Olympic distance as well. Is a lot of people kind of think that the longer the better. So if you're like an age grouper and you're maybe training to do like your first Olympic distance triathlon, which is like a 40k bike ride, there's bugger all point really in going out there and doing like 3, 4, 5 hours every weekend on your arse on the weekend. Most people basically lack quite a lot of specificity with their programs, and as I said, just get maybe a bit too much of the wrong stuff in there, I think.
Okay, that's interesting that you say sort of going too long too often, because I think that's always been the amateur approach, hasn't it? It's just I need to spend as much time with my trainers on, as much time on the bike as possible.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So let's get. I'm obviously interested in specifically like what you were doing for the Ironman, because as challenges go, it's about as tough as you're going to get. What did a training week look like for you? Obviously, you're running your own business as well, so it's not like you can just give 4 or 5 hours a day, train like a pro. You've got other things going on in your life. So I know it will have changed as you've gone along, but what was a typical training week sort of leading up to Kona?
Yeah, so I'm basically I actually got a coach who does all my programming. A guy called Tom Lowe, who's he holds a British Ironman record, and he's Chrissy Wellington's boyfriend. He's a good athlete.
Yeah.
So he actually coaches me, which is brilliant, because I think everyone needs a coach really in some form.
Yeah.
But my typical training week on a Monday would be I'd have a long run and a swim. The long run would be up to. Generally sits at around 2 hours, and then I think the longest one was maybe 2:15, and there'll be efforts in there perhaps every other week, sometimes every week as well. And then I'd have on a Monday as well, I'd have a swim, which is usually about 3.5k in the pool. Tuesdays is I'm meant to swim, but I can never get it in, so it's I just do my bike hill rep session, which will be between 1:45 and 2:30, and then in there I've usually got some climbs in the saddle. So a lot of the time it's like 4 lots of 5 minutes in the saddle, like pretty big gear, hard efforts going up the hills, and then a load of efforts on the flat as well. Wednesdays is each week alternates between a hill rep running session and like some efforts on the flat in a run. Usually that's up to about an hour and a quarter. And then there's like a 3.5k on a swim on a Wednesday. Thursdays is a brick session, so I'd be typically doing around 2.5 hours on the bike with some, with quite a lot of hard efforts in there, and then running off the bike in the lead up to Hawaii, it was kind of up to about an hour. I think I maybe had one run which was like 1:15. Friday was like an easy day, so I had about a 3k swim, and then just an easy run if I can get it in of about 45 minutes, and then like a bike session just on the turbo or the watt bike, and then on a Saturday it would usually be I'd have my long bike ride, which would be 4 or 5 hours, and then chill out on a Sunday.
Right, so in the lead up then you weren't doing any strength training, is that right?
Yeah, no, I mean, in the last few weeks before, I mean, that week I've just described to you there was like maybe a sort of a 19, 20-hour week.
Yeah.
And there literally was just no room to put it in within that last month. I mean, generally kind of for the rest of the season, I'll try and get maybe like 2 lots of half an hour done, which I can just kind of bang out here in the studio. But in that last sort of month leading up to Kona, there wasn't really a gap to actually throw it in there amongst everything else, unfortunately. But at the same time, I've managed to, I think, keep all the kind of strength and power gains that I get from the rest of the year in that last month there as well, which is good.
Okay, so I don't want to bang on about the strength training too much, but it's something people have asked us about, because it's a worry. Like, they kind of know they should be doing it, but like you said, they don't know where does it fit in with the season. What should they be doing? So what would you do in a weight training session? Because obviously you don't want to be doing bodybuilding stuff. You don't want to be adding weight. You don't want to be ripping your muscles apart and then you can't run. So what would a session look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I usually do like some sort of activation work to start off with, like getting my arse fired up properly and kind of releasing any kind of tight tissues. Usually I'll kind of focus on like my hip flexors and ITB and then get the ass fired up. and then I'll go into like a more dynamic warm up for say 5 minutes, and then there'll be up to about kind of 20 minutes of strength based stuff, and within that there'll be quite a bit of single leg work, which I think is pretty important. Quite a fair bit of body weight training, some good kind of core based stuff, working on kind of like your opposite hip to shoulder relationship, which is pretty important in swimming, cycling, and running. What else do we chuck in there? Every now and again we'll chuck some like explosive exercise in there as well, like just kind of generally more coming towards into the race season when we want to have a little bit more power coming our way.
Yep.
But that's generally how it goes, really. I mean, I don't really lift, obviously not lifting like a bodybuilding routine or anything like that. I mean, if I'm just training sort of like 2 half-hour workouts a week, then I just make sure I'm hitting everything in the session, and just kind of trying to make it specific as possible to the sport there as well.
Sweet. Okay, well let's talk food. I know I love food, you love food, everybody loves food. So again, this is another thing where I think in the amateur ranks especially, it's always been, I'm a triathlete, I do loads of work, I can just eat whatever I like. Potentially calories wise, that you might be able to get away with it, but obviously now we talk more about sort of performance and digestive health and everything like that. How do you balance the desire and the need to eat an absolute shitload with sort of keeping yourself healthy, eating the right stuff as well? How do you approach nutrition?
Yeah, so I basically try and, I guess I'm pretty much sort of 80 to 90% clean with my nutrition, like the vast majority of the time. So, if I'm kind of carb choices is quite a big one. Maybe I'll just mention that. So, sort of carb choices. A lot of people kind of have bread and pasta and all that sort of shite, but that stuff doesn't sit well with me, and I don't think it sits well with the vast majority of people, to be honest. So, kind of carb choice like that. I like to kind of get stuck into things like sweet potatoes and potatoes, kind of like a brown rice based pasta as well. I eat quite a lot of white rice as well to when I'm needing to get a decent amount of energy down as well. But yeah, I kind of keep it as clean as I can, and then kind of, I think the big thing with kind of like Ironman training in particular, one of the big things is actually getting your nutritional strategy right. So for instance, if you're going to be using a certain product in a race, I think it's really important to actually practice with that product, because there's going to be thousands of times that people have kind of tried a new product in a race and had all sorts of problems from stomachs, cramps to the full-on shits and everything in between. So it's really important to kind of practice your nutritional strategy. So I'll actually fuel in my sessions, anything over about sort of 90 minutes, I'll kind of fuel with the same gel products or the same like an energy drink product which I'll be racing with, which I think is pretty important. And kind of pre-race nutrition as well. I kind of make sure I'm sort of practicing kind of maybe at least kind of once a month. So for instance, for my brick day, so like on a Thursday morning, I'll try and have a similar breakfast to what I usually have kind of pre-race, and then again on like a Saturday morning before I actually go and do my big ride, I'll have the same sort of pre-race breakfast there as well. So again, I think it's pretty important to practice that sort of stuff.
On that breakfast thing, like what? Because this is another area where you speak to various athletes and they've all got different ways of doing things, but what's your approach? Like, are you, is it the traditional thing would be, right, I'm doing the London Marathon today, I'm doing a triathlon, I need a massive loads of oats for breakfast and loads of carbs and everything. And, some people say they find that actually ends up putting them to sleep on the bike because, we know carbs increase serotonin, things like that. So how do you balance all this in terms of making sure you're fueled up, but that your body's not just spending half the race digesting food?
Yeah, so I mean, on my race morning, for instance, if the race is starting at say 7 o'clock in the morning, I'll basically try and get my breakfast down at perhaps 4 o'clock. So I've got a good 3 hours there. My breakfast, like pre-race, I mean, everyone's is different pre-race generally, but what I found works for me is I'll have like white rice, like made as rice pudding. So I'll make that with like almond milk, and then in there I'll toss I'll chuck a bit of jam in there, and then like maybe some almond butter or peanut butter as well. Yeah. And that actually then sees me right through, and I won't actually eat anything up until I get on the bike, basically from then.
Right. I think that's quite interesting. So you're getting some fats in as well. Is that to help sort of slow things down, or?
Yeah, I mean, really I get really hungry all the time.
Yeah.
So like And if the thought of me going out and spending like 10, however many hours, like without eating anything proper, just scares me to the bone. So I'll make sure I basically chuck that in there just to make sure I'm not gonna stay satisfied for as long as possible, really.
Yeah. What about like the days before? Because that's another thing. People talk about carb loading, and they're like carb loading for 2 weeks before to make sure they got enough calories. How do you approach that so that you're fueling the muscles, but you're not adding unnecessary body fat?
Yeah, so I think that like 90% of triathletes, certainly 90% of age group triathletes, are carb loading all the time anyway. And so one thing my coach kind of got across, he didn't really need to get it across too much, but just mentioned to me was to not bother like really adding extra in the week or two leading up to the race, because I'm already getting down probably like a boatload of kind of rice and pasta, rice and like potatoes and stuff like that in the lead up to it anyway. So I'll never kind of bother actually carb loading typically you have like about maybe a 2 week to 10-day taper before a race. So it's actually in that time you might actually reduce it ever so slightly what you're taking in, maybe certainly for the first maybe week or so of that time, and then maybe have a couple of slightly bigger portions, maybe a couple of days before the race. Sort of like the night before a race, I'll try and get my last meal down by about sort of 6 o'clock, just so I can I can get to bed relatively early, and it shouldn't have too much of a negative effect on me, and then I can get the next day. If you got to eat at 4 o'clock in the morning, you don't want to have your last meal at kind of 9 o'clock at night, because there's no chance you're going to be hungry at 4 o'clock. So that's pretty important as well.
So have you taken any sort of really clear steps in terms of personalising a nutrition plan? This is something one of our triathlon team have asked. How do you work out a personalised nutrition plan? Do you subscribe to sort of working out exact calories and ratios, or is it just something you've sort of discovered as you've gone along?
With my kind of just normal nutrition plan, so just like as I am kind of day-to-day basis, I've never really tried to work anything out really. It's just kind of trial and error, and if it feels good, I roll with it. If it doesn't, then I need to change it. With regard to like in the actual race, I actually go off 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per hour. So if I'm say 70 kilos in weight, I'll need about 70 grams of carbs per hour. Yeah, per hour. So I'll be looking at taking about that on board during the race.
So when you say carbs, where are you getting that? What sort of supplements are you using? Is that just maltodextrin on its own, or how are you doing that?
Yeah, so in the race I use GU energy gels are one of my favourites. Because they taste bloody nice, actually. I'm not being funny, right? But the peanut butter one you could stir in your porridge and have a hell of a party. the mint chocolate one tastes like melted after it. It's insane.
Awesome.
But so they're kind of maltodextrin based, which I'm in two minds whether that's the best thing for me or not, because I actually get stomach issues quite a bit. So I'm actually going to try and play around with a couple of other things and maybe try and get a simpler sort of sugar down and see if that does anything for me, really. But so I'll use that, and then I fuel on like an energy drink as well in the race. I use Cytomax is the energy drink I use generally.
Right.
But then sort of in and around training as well, I use a couple of Phil Richards supplements. So I'll take some aminos, like an amino complex, sort of 45 minutes before workout, and then straight after I'll take a recovery-based drink as well, like a vegan blend. So it's got like I think like pea and rice and hemp protein in there as well. So sort of post-workout. I think both of those things actually help quite a lot, to be honest, especially with recovery, with the reasonable amount of volume which I get done. I think it's pretty important to kind of stay on top of those sorts of things.
So what are you actually a vegan, or is there any particular reason for that?
No, I've got no interest in being vegan. No offence to any vegans, sorry. No, I love meat too much. But no, I just it's either that or like a dairy based one, isn't it? Really, I'm not a big fan of kind of whey. Really, it doesn't really sit with me too well, and I find like the vegan blend actually sits pretty well, and I feel pretty good off it.
Cool. Right, let's talk a bit about the mental side of it, because again, especially with endurance, I think that's some people say it's 80% of the battle is whether you can keep your mind on track. So one of our members said, I'm interested in mental toughness. What methods and techniques does Andy use to override that desire to just kind of switch off? And when you're pushing to the limit and the mind's saying that you've had enough, it's time to stop. Is there any particular methods you use or techniques that you've sort of honed to keep you going, or just to basically switch your brain off?
To be honest, this is going to be a bit of a crap answer, but I don't really have any specific methods which I use like personally for anything like that. I mean, one of the sort of things with me, I think, is I can't stand the idea of like not getting across the finish line.
Right.
Like I just would, if it was a case of finishing it with like a broken leg or crying off with a broken leg at 10 miles into the bike, I think I'd want to try and do what I could to finish it with that broken leg. So one of the biggest things with me mentally is I can't stand the thought of like either not crossing the line or not kind of achieving what I wanted to kind of try and achieve in the race. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things. I think like obviously in a race you know you're going to have shit times. If you're doing like a race which is going to last anything between 8 and 17 hours, then you can be pretty sure that you're going to have pretty bad time at certain times. So it's kind of a case of just knowing it's going to happen and just embracing those bad times, because if you just kind of let your head get down and kind of focus on how shit everything is, then nothing's really going to end up going your way the rest of the day.
That's quite interesting, actually. I like that point. I think sometimes people want to expect that when they're going to do a challenge like this, part of the training is making everything perfect, and you're almost saying you're better off just accepting that things are going to go wrong. You're going to mess things up in training and in competition. Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and it's maybe not such the case in like a shorter distance race, but certainly if you're doing like a 70.3 or a full Ironman, there's so much that can go wrong. I mean, I think I've done 8 now, and in every single one of those races, I've had something pretty horrendous gone wrong, and something's happened. Which is an absolute bollock, which is probably the reason I keep doing them, because I'm still chasing the perfect race.
Well, that leads me on to my one of my final questions is, I mean, obviously completing an Ironman, like I said, it's one of the biggest challenges most people ever do in their life. But for someone who is thinking, right, I'd love to do that, but where the hell do I start? Because, I mean, we've talked about nutrition, we talked strength training, intervals, tempos, efforts. You've got to have the right bike, the right shoes, the right heart rate monitor. You can easily just end up thinking, look, I can't do all this. What's the best way to start? Like, I've never done triathlon. I've got a good base fitness. How would you suggest I start and just gradually build things up so that I can eventually do an Ironman?
Yes, I mean, one of the first things I have to tell someone when they come and say, I want to do triathlon, I want to do an Ironman, is go and buy a bike.
Yeah.
Because that's one of the very first things. It's like, I've not got a bike, right, go and buy one. But I mean, yeah, if you're just starting out, I mean, obviously it depends on like an individual's kind of where they're starting out in terms of fitness. But for someone like yourself, it's really a case of kind of you'd kind of look to do it as you do attack any challenge, really. So you know what date you're going to do it on, so you kind of pick that date and just work back from there, and then just plan in the lead up. Plan everything in the lead up to it as best you can, kind of periodise your plan. But really simple. For instance, if you're just looking to kick things off, then you want to start off by doing 2 or 3 swims, 2 or 3 bikes, 2 or 3 runs every week, and just start building that consistency in there. Because I think the absolute biggest thing is consistency when it comes to actually training. Because if you're if you're doing really well for maybe 2 weeks and your training's going good, but then you kind of sack it off for a week or two, then you're taking a couple of steps forwards and then another step back, and you're never going to get where you want to be. But that's the biggest thing I always try to get across to anyone, is it so long as you're consistent, you could be following the world's shittest triathlon program, but as long as it's like progression a bit and you're being consistent on it and actually sticking to it, then you're going to get some result. And obviously you want to stick to a good program consistently, but I think you kind of get what I'm saying with that. Like.
Yeah, so with a beginner, it's almost your main focus is really just getting in a routine of saying, like, even if you said, right, for 4 weeks, your sole goal is, I want to see that you've done, like you say, 2 runs, 2 bikes, 2 swims. We're almost not too concerned about performance or average heart rate and all that stuff. It's just let's get in the routine. Is that what you're saying?
That's it, yeah, pretty much. I mean, again, it depends what kind of place you're coming from. Because
Yeah.
a lot of the people that come into triathlon, they've either done they've done swimming as a kid, or they've done a bit of bike riding, or they come from like a running background. So everyone's usually got something that they're okay at.
Yeah.
So that's another point as well, is actually focusing on the weak points. So for instance, if you like, you're okay at running, and you've ridden a bike for, you've been able to ride a bike for a bit, but you're swimming shite, then the first thing to kind of do is, maybe book in with a swimming coach, or just absolutely force yourself to get in the pool 2 or 3 times a week and make that one of your priorities.
That's another interesting point, actually, because I dabbled with triathlon for a while till I had a hip problem. But one of the things that was bouncing around in my mind was that I'm one of those people. It's the swimming, like I think probably 99% of people who do triathlon, it's the swimming that I feel is gonna take me down. But how much time do you invest in your weakness as opposed to your strengths? Because, for instance, if you're doing a sprint distance triathlon, even with an amazing swimming program, you might, if you're average at swimming to start with, you're never really going to take off that much time. Whereas if you can really improve on your bike, in terms of the overall thing, you can obviously wallop a good amount off. So how do you balance that in terms of, you don't want to get obsessed with the weakness and maybe improve by 2 minutes on the swim when you could improve by half an hour on the bike? So how would you balance that?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's another real good point. And I think there's no right answer really. I mean, it does all come down to balance. It's if you can save 2 minutes on the swim or 10 minutes on the bike, get on that bike.
Yeah.
That's the end game of that. I could, for instance, spend the next 6 months really hammering my swim. Putting an extra hour and an hour in the pool every week or something, and focus on my technique and trying to hammer away at that swim time to maybe get my swim time from maybe 59, 60 minutes down to maybe 57, 58 minutes. So I'll really, really put everything into it. But at the same time, if I was to then, maybe focus a little bit more on my running, for instance, or my cycling, then chances are, I could take more of a chunk off. So again, it's finding that fine line. I think really.
I think the key point is don't just do what you enjoy.
That's very, very much. Yeah, don't if you're really good at swimming and not so great at cycling and running, then don't just swim 6 days a week, and maybe do your bike and run on the weekend.
Cool. Right, almost there. One thing, almost going a little bit off track. We said about, obviously, you got your own business. What about sort of outside relationships? Because obviously, again, with triathlon, especially Ironman, it almost becomes people become obsessed with it, and I know people who get panicky, like if they can't get their bike in or whatever. How do you manage this around relationships, and if you're married with kids and stuff? What would you suggest? How does someone approach that? Like they want to take on this challenge, and fair play to them, but also being aware that it's not just about go to the gym for an hour. It is going to take over a lot of your life. What would you suggest on that front?
Yeah, this is a toughie, I guess, and it's one where I'm really, really fortunate, but a lot of people are really, really unfortunate. I'm fortunate enough to be married to her now, but be married to a woman who like really understands it. I mean, I think I said this in my wedding speech actually. There aren't too many women in the world who would let their man take his bike with them to bloody places like New York and Bermuda and go out training when you're meant to be on holiday. So she's good as gold like that. But I appreciate that most majority of people aren't like that, and the majority of people don't have to be like that, I guess. But striking that balance is one of the hard things. I mean, obviously, if you're trying to train even like 10 hours a week, if you've got like a family, then that's gonna, obviously that's 10 hours a week you're potentially not spending with your family, and that can potentially lead to whatever problems, or just a bit of friction or whatever. So I think at the very start, one of the things to do is actually sit down with your significant other, and actually say, look, this is what I want to do. This is the cost. The cost by cost, I mean this is what it's going to mean time wise. It might be down to money as well. This is what it's going to be, and I'm going to have to set aside X or whatever. But just let them know what the score is based in, and say, look, are you on board, and really just try and make sure that they're going to be on board with you. And as I said, trying to make sure you got that balance in there. I mean, one of the things that someone said to me, which is, I think I wrote a blog on it a while ago actually, is that I think is really important, is if you want to achieve anything, like whether it's doing getting across a finish line in an Ironman, or doing a marathon, or being successful in your business, I think you've got to be selfish to a point. And actually, a lot of people, mums in particular, I think, and dads a lot of the time as well, don't put themselves first too often. So I think the whole being selfish bit can be hard for people. But what I would say to people is, don't be afraid of actually putting yourself first and saying, right, now, fuck it, I've actually got to go out and do this. So screw you for half an hour, or an hour.
I think that's really important. Like, even with what we do, generally when we're talking about fat loss and everything else, there's a lot of people who, you get inspired, you want to hit this goal, right, I want to lose 3 stone, I want to do this, I want to do that, but I think we've become a bit obsessed with what's the ideal training program, what's the ideal nutrition plan, and a lot of people, that stuff's irrelevant, because if you can't get in 3 times a week and you can't find 10 minutes to make a salad, the rest almost becomes irrelevant. And I think with triathlon and Ironman, it's just magnified to a whole new degree. But yeah, it's great that you've come up with this challenge, but really, have you got room in your life for it? And I think that's maybe one of the most important questions before you even start talking about getting on the bike and swimming and everything else.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and it's a case of, a lot of the time, if you're gonna take on something like an Ironman, which is, it's on average probably going to require 10 to 15 hours a week, just training wise, in terms of commitment, then you've got to kind of look at where that 10 to 15 hours is going to come in. And it might well be that you've got to sack off a couple of things, like for instance, every now and again have a bit, not trouble, but I've really got to get the point across to people that if someone's playing 5-a-side football 3 nights a week, then sorry, but you got to get rid of that. If that's something like that is just going to be adding to the pile, and in those if you're someone who's struggling for time, in particular, that sort of 3-4 hours a week playing 5-a-side, you've got to get rid of that and kind of focus on what it is that you want to achieve.
Just almost do some house cleaning first, and then it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to do all this stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. Take things away before you put new things in, I think is one thing to kind of think about.
Right, last question on triathlon, Ironmans. What do you do after an Ironman? I think you said you've done 8 now, so maybe the answer is do another one. But what's that fit? You get that elation when you cross the line. Then what are the thoughts going through your head about where you go next?
I'm usually right. Where's the toilet? But
basic.
Yeah, in terms of that, like I'm always kind of looking for the next thing, and the next race or the next result, and I know in my head what I want to achieve and what I'm physically capable of achieving, and then until I've done that, I'm going to be pissed off. But until I've done that, I'm not going to be kind of satisfied with what I've done and what I'm doing. So
this might seem like an insignificant question, but have it with experience with clients we've had, I think it's actually more important than people think. Do you tend to have the next goal lined up before you cross the line? Because we've had people who, they've done things like they climb Kilimanjaro and they're focused and they're doing their training, and it's almost like as soon as they've got to the top of the mountain, or the plane lands and they get home, all of a sudden it's almost like life crumbles because they've no longer got that focus. Do you think it's a good idea to constantly have something else lined up, or is there benefit to just having some downtime and sort of rethinking?
I do and I don't. For myself, I'm quite happy to get across that finish line and have nothing else. If that's a lot of the time, maybe an Ironman would be like my last race of the season. So for instance, like the one I did in Kona, I mean that was like the 4th one I'd done within I think 10 months, which was a bit silly. But then after that, I was just like, right, let's have a rest. But then I know that the next year I'm going to do another one and I'm going to look to do it better. But I think certainly for the majority of people, and definitely for the majority of people going out to do their very first one, is you've got to be careful of what they like to call like the post Ironman blues.
Yeah.
Which is basically, if you imagine if you're if you spend 6, 12 months of your life with this massive goal out on the horizon, and that's what everything you're doing, you're training, you're working towards that goal, you're getting closer every month, closer every week, closer every day, and then you kind of reach that summit, and it's like, shit, right, let's get across that line. You cross the finish line, and then suddenly you're stood on the edge of a cliff looking over, and there's nothing there but dirty Weymouth Harbour, but yeah, and I think that can be quite daunting for some people maybe, and I think it can be. It's important to have a bit of downtime.
Yeah.
I think at the same time it's actually good to maybe for the first few weeks after an Ironman to actually have some idea in your head about kind of what you want to do in terms of actually having a structure to help your recovery. I think is quite important in the couple of weeks after. Whether that's a case of, right, I'm going to have a week of literally just hitting the ice bath and chilling out and stuff like that, and then maybe have a week or 2 weeks where I just maybe get on the bike for half an hour 3 times a week. Having some sort of structure to kind of stick to, I think, is something that I certainly find is quite helpful for post race as well.
Yeah. And what are your thoughts on naked pull-ups? Because I've got video evidence of you doing it, and I've done it myself. Why is it so exciting?
I think for me, it's all about giving the public what they want. You wouldn't believe how many emails I get each week and each day from people saying, Andy, I saw a picture of you doing a naked pull-up once. Can you maybe bang a few out and chuck it on YouTube and let's just have a gay old time. Yeah, but it's all about giving the public what they want from my point of view.
Definitely. And what's your favourite joke?
I did think about this, and I genuinely, I'm probably the shittest person to ask for jokes, simply because I've got the memory of an absolute fish. You could quite happily tell me the funniest joke you knew right now, and then by tomorrow I wouldn't be able to repeat it. Right.
Okay. Well, that's your mission. Before this video goes up on the blog, I want a joke, and we'll put it under the video.
Is it allowed to be a rude one?
It can be a rude one. Yeah. Anything goes on my blog.
Oh,
if it makes you better, stronger, or makes you laugh, it goes on the blog. So I might even, if you could send me the photo of your naked pull-up, we'll post that as well.
Oh yeah, but I got to warn you. If there's some ladies watching, don't let your husband see it because they're going to get upset.
Right, Andy Sloan, I've had enough of you. So thanks for your time. And is there anywhere guys can find out, or girls can find out more about you and what you're up to in your training? Have you got a blog or a web address we can send them to?
Yeah, they can have a look at andysloanfitness.com. They can have a look at there. I'm banging shit up there every week, in fact. So there's always something relatively interesting going up there. So yeah, check that one out.
Awesome. Right, thanks a lot, Andy. And obviously, if you want to get more info from Andy, then check out his blog and fire him loads and loads of questions so it gets in the way of his training.
Yeah, brilliant.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Andy. Cheers, mate.
Man, thanks, buddy. Cheers.